Have you ever seen a race car? Sure, there are muscle cars, sports coupes, super saloons, and exotics like Lamborghinis, but what do they all have in common? They all have high performance engines. But what about race engines? Well, I'm here to tell you that it's possible to build one and can be done for the same price as a brand new high-end PC. Here are all the things you need to know about making a race engine for $1,000. First, let's start off with an introduction. Hi, my name's Will.i.amBayles. I'm an automotive enthusiast studying at Oklahoma State University for mechanical engineering, and I build engines and tune cars. Some of my previous projects involve engine swapping a Kawasaki and remapping Hondas. I'm also currently building a 200 horsepower racing sport bike engine for a Formula car. Please go check out Engineering Explained because he has been extremely beneficial when learning about engines, and check out High Performance Academy for information on tuning and building motors. Now back to how to build a $1,000 turbo race engine. First, we'll start off with the basics. Engines need a couple of things to work: a block, pistons, connecting rods, and a crankshaft, a cylinder head, air, fuel, and spark. When choosing an engine to build cheaply, it's typically best to choose something light, compact, with a high power output, or massively produced engine that has also been used in high-performance cars. For example, a V8 from a truck that shares many components with a Chevy Corvette, or a Honda engine that shares many of their parts with their top-of-the-line Type R. With these variables in mind, many engines can be turned into race engines, but for a $1,000 budget, a motorcycle engine works best. For most motorcycle engines, they are light, put out massive amounts of power for their size. They also come with their transmissions connected, and their drivetrain is either a shaft or a chain connected to sprockets. Another benefit is that motorcycle engines are significantly cheaper than larger engines. For my engine, I bought a $50 Suzuki Katana motor with a capacity of 600 cc, which is derived from the engine's crankshaft stroke and cylinder bore. This motor is oil-cooled, so it's simpler than a water-cooled variant, like the ones found in cars. It's also a 4-cylinder, which means it's simple, light, balanced, and doesn't have many vibrations. This, in turn, makes it have the ability to rev high like an F1 car and make lots of power. For a typical race car, the amount of power you want is derived by the weight of the chassis and series regulations. For most race cars, weights can vary from 2,300 pounds to 3,000 pounds, meaning a good margin for power is anywhere from 250 horsepower to 500 horsepower. This will give the car great acceleration when exiting turns or going in a straight line. My engine comes factory with 86 horsepower. But considering the car I have is under 1,000 pounds, 86 horsepower is not severely underpowered, but on the lower side of power. To make it into a more powerful race-bred engine, I must modify it and have it turbocharged. When building any engine, there are many factors to consider: reliability, tuning, fuel delivery, compression, and cooling. You first want to inspect your engine for any damage or missing components, to get a good grasp of everything that could be wrong. The engine must be fully disassembled, cleaned, and looked over. The engine I chose was seized when I bought it, but after taking it apart, I found no major issues. Surprisingly, it had a pin come loose that stopped the engine from being able to turn over. I cleaned up all the pieces and found out what I needed to make it more powerful. My engine came with an old school fuel system consisting of 4 carburetors, which were fine initially, but after replacing them and rebuilding them for about $160 total, I decided it would have just been better to just freshen them up completely and then sell them. The reason is that carburetor tuning is on extremely modified versions of this engine is largely undocumented, and I have more experience with electronic fuel injection, which is what's on cars past year 2000. There's one issue though: since there's barely any documentation, most of my fuel injection system would have to be custom. This has a couple benefits and drawbacks, but on the upside, this process works for nearly every engine. It also makes your engine more reliable, allows for more reliable power, allows you to configure the engine how you like. It also increases gas mileage and makes it easy to start. The downsides are as follows: you have to make it yourself, which is obvious. It costs more, and is more complicated than a carburetor setup. And while unlikely, it may not be able to be applied to your engine. You will need a throttle body, or multiple, injectors, if you need to, a better engine control unit, or ECU for short. Since my engine didn't come factory with an ECU, the best option for the budget is a Speeduino, an Arduino board with another computer board that you wire together. Speeduinos can be made for under $250, which is a steal compared to other types of engine management. You then have to configure all your sensors. The mains you will need are a map sensor and wideband O2 sensor for fuel, a crank sensor or cam sensor for ignition, a throttle position sensor for measuring load, and others could be included, but this is the bare minimum. Prices for all these wiring and sensors can be anywhere from nearly free by having all the necessary components from factory or getting them when you bought the engine to realistically around $250 when making a high-end wiring harness. But it can even go up to $600 for a full wiring kit. After configuring your ECU, you can now add a turbocharger to increase your performance by feeding the engine more air than it could naturally. The best way to get a good turbocharger on the cheap side is to either buy them used, or if you don't want to spend more than $100, you can just get one from a junkyard, although you will have to ensure it's not faulty. Installing a turbo can increase power from anywhere to 30% up to 200% with the correct modifications, such as swapping out the stock pistons and rods with lighter and stronger ones, which also makes it more reliable. And in addition, when choosing pistons, you can also get ones that decrease the compression. By decreasing compression, you enlarge the amount of space that air and fuel can take up inside your combustion chamber. By increasing that, you now are able to add even more air and fuel into the engine, which makes more power. A downside to buying off-the-shelf pistons and rod is, while they are extremely durable, they come at a high price tag of at least $900. Well, when you factor in for 4 pistons on a 4-cylinder, that is. So if you have any type of fabrication machine, milling, CNC, it may be better to make copies of your own factory parts in a stronger material and then have them balanced and treated afterwards. Other ways to decrease compression is a thicker head gasket, and the more unorthodox methods and unrecommended methods would be installing shorter rods or carving out the combustion chamber to increase space, which will require precision to ensure all the chambers are equal. I decided to go the mildly unorthodox route and carve a little bit out of the combustion chamber, though this was because I upgraded the bore and had to match the combustion chambers to the cylinders. After doing this, you will have to modify the ECU settings to allow for the accommodation of more boost, which will require decreasing ignition timing and using more fuel. Last but not least, you want to upgrade your cooling. When adding power to your engine, it will generate more heat. The turbo will produce heat from the compression of air entering it, and it will absorb heat from the exhaust that powers its turbines. To alleviate this heat, many solutions are available. The most cost-effective components are a turbo blanket, exhaust wrap, and an intercooler for the turbocharged compressed air. An upgraded oil cooler or radiator depends on whether your engine is air, water, or oil cooled. It may also be beneficial to add an upgraded oil cooler just so you keep the oil going through the turbo cool. You will also want to run higher octane gas, the highest you can buy from the pump or a Ford. Most people run 91 or E85, which are highly knock resistant or, in simpler terms, less prone to pre-igniting or igniting at the wrong time inside your engines due to factors like heat, high compression, or too little fuel. Knock is something that you want to avoid at all costs and one of the major causes of catastrophic engine failure. After installing a turbo, there may be other modifications you can do. Or if you do not want to install a turbo, you can do these as well, but you won't get as much of a power gain. For high horsepower naturally aspirated engines, power comes at a much higher cost and is largely inefficient. The good thing is, there is a lot less that can go wrong. To do so, you will want to increase the valve surface area. Larger valves mean more air that can be supplied into the combustion chamber with fuel, which can cost thousands of dollars of work. In addition, the intake and exhaust ports should be ported and polished. This can be done relatively cheaply, but is very easy to mess up and can ruin your cylinder head. A professional job can cost hundreds of bucks. Porting and polishing will reduce any air restriction and promote better airflow. For one of the cheapest mods for naturally aspirated power, you should have an unrestricted intake and exhaust. No sharp bends, and they should be large enough to flow as much air as the engine needs at its highest load. But gains are typically minimal unless the factory intake and exhaust are extremely restrictive. For the most bang for buck, you will want to install performance or modified factory camshafts. Camshafts control the valves in the cylinder head, and they regulate when intake air comes into the engine and when it leaves. By having upgraded camshafts, you can shift the power band higher and into the RPM range, and when paired with upgraded valve springs, you can raise the red line and make more horsepower. Just be sure your engine internals can handle it. Now then, if you want to build a cheap racing engine, remember this: choose a good building block. There are tons of engines, so find what fits your goal and wants. It is easier to build on a good foundation than a 45-degree angle. Get all your electronics sorted out, and choose how you want to make power. Boost is fun, but can turn into a ruined engine in seconds, and while keeping your engine naturally aspirated can be expensive, it still can put a smile on your face, and save you from expensive repairs too.